necessary for human growth, just like progress is held back by being closed-minded and by an unflinching faith of pre-established beliefs. Can we use faith to guide us in finding knowledge and allowing ourselves to grow? Yes, but even though religion and faith has guided scientific explanation and explorations, it was not the main source of knowledge. Previous historical movements strayed away from a religious focus and moved towards intellectual thought and development. This, in a way, shows us that there are different types of people in the world. I'll say two of them. Those who like to say, if I can see it, if I can touch it, then it's real. But then there are those who say, well, I believe it's real, so it's real. Let's put that to the test. If someone says they can take their magic carpet and fly around the world, can they really do that? If someone says, or someone claims that they can read your mind and you ask what you're thinking of and they say the wrong answer, then what does it mean? It's not true. It's not a skill someone has, and it isn't something that can actually happen, at least for right now. But now, if I say that that wall at the front is a whiteboard meant for drawing and writing on, is it? You see what I mean? If you can see it, you can touch it, then it's real. And this is how we use experiences and what we learn in school to define science and to define knowledge, and etc. Religion and faith can cause problems that science can avoid. God is always the answer, some people like to say, but sometimes people will not accept the facts around them, so they can continue to believe more in their religion or keep the faith. People will turn to God for every crisis and expect everything to be fixed by Him, as well as caused by Him. But people can be more willing to bend the truth to what they want to be true, but what may not actually be true. I'll end with this. People who undoubtedly follow faith can develop the inability to accept progress because of their desire to stick with what they know, play it safe, and create a space for science to be ignored, rather than facing the facts around them. How does this even allow for the gaining of knowledge, let alone the justification of it?
Thank you, Amaya. We'll now move to our opening statement from the defenders of faith.
All right. So faith is a common framework. Am I good to go? All right. Faith is a common framework used to view the world. Over 80% of the human population believes in some form of faith or religion. It's common, people use it. It has to at least somewhat work. It can be a path to personal fulfillment and a way to work with gaps in knowledge that we cannot be certain of. If we do not fully understand something, we are going to need something to bridge the gaps in between our knowledge, and faith can be a bit of a glue, a way to understand the world as we're still working out how we understand it. It can faith has a myriad of definitions ranging from personal belief or duty to believing something that is true will occur, or to a more religious aspect. You can have faith in someone you know. You can have faith in a practice that will have a result. You can have faith in anything that you really wish you really want to. And faith is expressed in so many different ways: Catholicism, Judaism, Islam, any other religion that you could feel like doing, Zoroastrianism if you felt so inclined. They all have their own distinct ways of expressing faith, you can't claim one covers all of them. And I would like to switch over to Isaac, if you're good.
Yeah. One thing that seems very interesting, just according to some book definitions of faith, there's plenty to look from. And we can say for sure that religion isn't what faith, religion isn't just faith. Faith can be, more general, like a system of beliefs. So it makes us think that faith possibly could be similar to science in many ways. I mean, and it doesn't always have to be contradictory to science. I mean, you have one theory that's essentially, how did the world even start in the first place? I mean, can science really explain that? To too much, even before the Big Bang, how does that even happen? Faith could help explain that gap in knowledge that we have in science. And if science is able to explain that, it's not really that or really contradictory much at all. And faith can also be a way of helping advance science in a way, because you have examples such as Gregor Mendel. He got funding from the church to conduct these experiments in plant life and how plants reproduce. Faith didn't really have many really contradict much of that specific theory, and there are probably multiple other examples where faith doesn't contradict science. And, to be honest, faith really, it's something that we all encompass in many different ways. I mean, we obviously, like the example, the sun will rise. Even though we don't have a basis for believing that the sun won't rise, that doesn't mean that the sun will rise every time, because I mean, we think that based off our experiences, but we have to have faith that our experiences alone are going to be able to explain what's happening around us. And even with things such, even things that don't really make sense at all, like uh, how Christianity and Judaism started, how people saw these prophecies from God. I mean, it's not like science can explain that really well at all, because I mean, it doesn't really tap into like the core of religion. It's just another way of explaining the world, as said earlier. Faith really, how we define faith as a system of beliefs is how we think faith should be interpreted. That'll close off our opening statement.
All right. I would like to start off the question and answer section with a question for the defense. So I just want to make sure that I have this right. You guys are claiming that faith is a way to interpret and fill in the gaps of things that science can't explain, correct?
Yes, but it doesn't exactly have to be contradictory to what science explains. I mean, sometimes it does happen, but that's just kind of how, in many ways, the world can work. There's always going to be like opposition, so I don't think that's really avoidable in that
Okay.
sense.
So with that, would you call that knowledge if it's a guess as to what's going on that science isn't explaining? Is that knowledge because it's different depending on the faith?
So science is not, you cannot say that science is knowledge and say that religion is not knowledge. That's kind of contradictory because no matter what, you cannot prove anything on earth. There's no valid way to prove something and know that it is for sure real, even in science. Science is based off of you haven't been able to disprove it yet. And it's based off of multiple trials. And I mean, you're just doing it over and over. There's no real way to prove that in the future it may not work. Faith is the same way. And that's what's at its core, is that you're not for sure. So you're going to believe it no matter what, just because it's not like you can prove that it is real.
Okay, thank you, Dylan.
I would like to just continue sort of along that line. If we're assuming what you're saying to be true, that faith is a kind of knowledge, then how would using faith to fill gaps in knowledge, wouldn't that prevent the further investigation of truth? Wouldn't that actually halt the progression towards fact, the progression towards true knowledge?
I'm sorry if I don't understand, but could you please elaborate on that a little more? So what
Sure,
are you asking?
absolutely. Okay.
Bridge between, or if like we use faith as knowledge, that'll put us back somehow. What are you trying to say?
So if you're saying that faith fills the gaps where we don't know knowledge is, when you can't explain something, that is where you're using faith to justify it. And in that way, you are saying that it's a kind of knowledge. It can be a basis for knowledge. Well, if you were to assume that this faith can be a basis for knowledge, is it possible for the progression towards truth, for investigation, to be halted, to be less motivated, or to be completely misled by assumptions of faith? Wouldn't assumptions of faith only serve to make people feel better about their knowledge, more content, rather than actually lead us towards true fact?
I do believe that faith serves that purpose, as you mentioned, not necessarily pacification, but kind of more assurance that you can understand the world around you, and that if we can't find a truth through science, as we mentioned in the last point, that science is basically going off of precedent. It's that science is what it is because it hasn't been disproven. We're kind of going off of the point as maybe there isn't any real truth that we could be arguing. It's that which option, faith or science, gets you a better justification for what we can believe, and we're firmly on this side that faith is kind of a better way to get at that. And I see Charlotte had a point, so I'll let Charlotte go right now.
Yes, if I may. We have had multiple instances where the church has directly funded scientific research instead of just letting things go. Gregor Mendel was the example that we had given, and Mendel himself was doing research into genetics and how we pass on traits to our descendants. Though you could argue that his thing with beans wasn't exactly how it works because Punnett squares aren't super accurate, whatever. But the thing is that the church directly funded his research and was therefore looking for scientific advancement, even though they could have just said, you look the way you do because God says so. And also, this is very much case by case. One religion might very much decide, no, don't go into science, while another might directly want to have funding go into science. And of course, each one's going to have different beliefs over what would be taboo to cover. Charles Darwin's research was bad look for the church, but if it had been some other church, that could have gone over really, really well.
And then I wanted to go back to the idea, this is our last question for the defense, but so your question, you were saying that faith is a reasonable justification for knowledge, and you stated that faith can be used on ideas not yet proven, while science is things that may not necessarily be true, but there is data and reasonable logic to back it up. So how is faith able to be a reasonable justification if you're able to use it for something that has no way to prove or have any idea if it could possibly work, and it could be used to apply to any range of claims if nothing on earth is proven, as you've mentioned?
So I think the basis of that question is a little biased, actually, based on the fact that we're raised in an age today where science and empiricism is the norm. That's what everyone believes. But in reality, it's just on par with any other way to justify knowledge. It's just that you were raised in a society who praises that. So to your question, you're saying that faith isn't as good because it cannot prove logic and reason, but that's an empiricist viewpoint. That's not what faith is for. Faith gives other types of truth. Science is for different types of truth. Faith can give personal, philosophical, societal truths, more mental things that aren't the same as empiricism and induction that rely on other forms of thinking like logic and reason. So I think the question itself can't really be applied because it's biased in the fact that you're already assuming that logic and reason is a better way to justify things than what faith is about.
We need to move on. Sorry, Claire. We need to move on to the other group. So for the prosecution, I was wondering if you guys could elaborate a little bit on your sun point, because I would argue that as a child, I had no idea how the earth worked, that it was tilted on an axis and that the sun would rise every morning. Because of that, I would argue that I saw it happen every day, and that led me to have a belief that it would happen the next day as well. So if you could just elaborate.
So I can take that one. And that's exactly our point, is that you think that the sun will rise every day. without any justification, when in reality the sun could stop rising every day, because we know, because of science, by studying stars that and other stars, that when a star collects too much mass, it actually becomes a supernova and collapses in on itself. And so that by just looking at the sun rise every day, you don't actually know that it will rise the next day. We know that it's going to rise the next day by studying the mass of our sun and comparing it to other stars.
So you say that we don't actually know that it's going to rise every day, and then you want to counter that by saying,
We
well,
don't know
by-
because of faith. We don't know because of faith. My bad. I'm sorry.
So by saying we don't know,
I'm saying we know through science, but not through faith.
Would you say that point, as Beatrice mentioned, is only applicable to those who have that inherent knowledge of that science behind it? Because not every human on Earth has that knowledge that you've stated about the mass of the stars.
Exactly. So they don't know. They don't know the sun's going to rise tomorrow, for sure. They can hypothesize that the sun will rise tomorrow, but they would not. In 1,000 years, if someone were to say the sun's going to rise tomorrow, just because it has risen every day, they could be wrong, because at that point, the sun might have collected so much mass that it would collapse on itself.
But okay, this is my last point on this, and then we're moving on. But for both those people, it could be the same percentage true. Both people could 100%, one from faith and one from science, have a 100% belief that the sun will rise. So even though they may not know it, to them it will. How
But
would you answer that?
the science supports it, and the science can also tell you when it won't rise, whereas a person who just believes it because they've seen it happen in the morning could actually be proven wrong in the future. Whereas if you have a scientific foundation, you won't be wrong because you'll know.
I have a question. In your opening statement, you said that there's a difference. There's two types of people in the world. One who, if they can see it, they believe it's real, or they say it's real, so it must be real. Isn't if you can see it, it's real? Wouldn't that be a kind of having faith in your senses? As the defense was saying, the faith can also be not just religious faith, but a faith in a process or a faith in an idea about the possibilities of a person or about the capacities of somebody. So in this way, wouldn't faith be a justification for any sort of evidence based on the senses?
Well, I think faith alone cannot be used for justification. Because if you only use faith to justify a claim, then I do not believe it's valid. For example, the Mendel experiment that they were talking about, basically faith motivated him to find out more, but I do not believe faith justified that point. So because Mendel had to conduct experiments, he did not just believe by faith. He may have hypothesized, but he did not believe by faith. And so he could not claim that his knowledge was true. He had to justify that faith with experiments, not faith.
Okay, so you said that faith alone cannot be a reasonable justification of knowledge. Would you make a distinction then between faith alone and faith in combination with evidence?
What do you mean, like what distinction? Or
I'm saying, would you make a distinction? Like, would you say faith is a reasonable justification of knowledge when it's coupled with scientific investigation?
yes, I would concede that point, but I think the claim that we're arguing says it's a reasonable justification. And so to me, a reasonable justification should stand on its own.
so you say you have knowledge that the sun will rise, and you have that knowledge from science, but since we don't have the qualifications to test that theory ourselves through science, wouldn't you say that following that claim made by science is faith itself?
You kind of cut off in the beginning, so
Okay, I'll repeat myself. So you say that we know the sun will rise, and we know that claim from science, but since we don't have the qualifications to like test that theory given to us by science, wouldn't you say following that claim is faith?
I'm confused why we don't have the qualifications to test that by science, because we have satellites and telescopes and we've calculated it. And I don't know, there's just 24-hour monitoring of the sun. It's not like a question. It's like we can see live what the sun is doing. It's like by using science, we know exactly. I don't understand where don't we have the qualifications?
I mean, us personally, like we can't test that theory personally. So how would we
Well,
be
we
able to follow that
can.
claim?
We can. If you've
Ethan, you're not a scientist.
you don't have to use a telescope, but I mean, like I don't know.
I think
Sorry.
I think what Lee was saying, and then I'll ask my question, is just that some people have faith in scientists that what they're saying is true because not everyone is personally testing that. But I just wanted to ask, so in your opening statement, you mentioned that people could make claims such as that they could fly across the world, and these are all things that are unable to be proven. And so are you saying that claims are equal to faith?
I don't think that we're saying that claims are equal to faith. I think faith, when you use faith to justify certain points, I don't believe those points are valid. So I don't think those are the same thing, claims and faith.
All right, thank you to both groups so much. It was really interesting to hear your guys' sides, and we're definitely going to listen to your closing arguments and then have a lot to discuss.
I don't know what you said. We cut off before.
Oh, okay, sorry. Can we have the closing argument for the prosecution?
Yep. Although for a time, faith served as a source of knowledge for humanity, scientific methods have been proven as a more logical way to gain knowledge. While knowledge from faith and religion has been increasingly discredited, it all comes down to evidence and how strong it can hold. Faith does not have to contain it. For example, I have faith that my mom loves me because she gave me life, but she proves it with what she does for me. Faith is a feeling someone gets and it satisfies our hearts. Of course, science cannot answer everything. As we have discussed in class, sometimes there is no clear line to have a distinction between the two. There must always be some accepted assumption to form the basis for further knowledge. However, instead of dogmatically claiming it has all the answers already like religion does, science allows for criticism of pre-existing theories and adaptation when a new observation contradicts those theories. Meanwhile, faith can be interpreted in many different ways. Science makes claims based on things we can repeatedly experience, just like faith, so the knowledge one gains from faith is just as valid. However, claims in science are based on experiments that can be tested and verified, but personal experiences cannot. There's quite a bit of supposed knowledge from faith that has been disproven, like the sun revolving around Earth, and it provides no method for systematically proving which of these interpretations are the most correct, or which claim is correct. Science rests on evidence and theories gathered through observation and continuous scrutiny. Religion simply appeals to authority to back up its claims, which is a logical fallacy. Therefore, faith is not a reasonable method to justify knowledge.
All right, and then the defense, please.
Okay. So we want to use this quote from Leo Tolstoy. Faith is the strength of life. If a man lives, he believes in something. If he did not believe that one must live for something, he would not live. So at its core, we see faith at generally meaning the same thing as trust. In debates like these, we often lose sight of the fact that people who use science and reason are also using faith because they have trust in what they are doing will lead them to knowledge. Faith is often stereotyped for only being something for religious knowledge, for the pursuit of religious knowledge, when that is not the case. Faith oftentimes does fill in the gaps where reason and scientific knowledge cannot explain. It gives us hope for the future. At the end of the day, why do we acquire knowledge? Because it provides us with meaning. While science can help the pursuit of knowledge, using science alone would render our lives meaningless. And then Elias.
If you ask today's generation if they prefer faith or science as a way to prove knowledge, they'll obviously choose science. But you see, the question itself is wrong because it's not always about proving something and about proof, but sometimes what's truth. And just because you can't prove faith every time, it doesn't mean there's no truth in it. In fact, faith can stand by itself because sometimes it is itself is knowledge. If you take religion and other things that are faith-based, how will you use science to just justify the knowledge? You can't really, because they're deeply connected to faith. So there's some things that we need faith in our lives. And if we need it, that means it's a reasonable justification because we use it and it helps us.
Okay, I guess we'll begin deliberation and we'll come back to you with our decision.
Okay, guys, I'm going to open up the breakout rooms again. You can go decompress and debrief with your groups, and we'll come back in just a few minutes. What's up? All right, really quickly before we hear the verdict from our jurors, round of applause for all of our participants today. You did a great job.
Who's the winner?
What is the verdict?
With a unanimous decision, we have decided to give it to the defense. They were more well-rounded, and we felt that they made a little bit more sense and didn't use a tone with us as much as the other side. So thank you guys both. You both did have good points.
Congratulations to everyone. Well done. I love you all. See you on Friday. The court didn't like the sass.